Hi, thank you everyone for coming for another screening series Q&A. My name is Camelia Shofani, and I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs and Events at the International Documentary Association. We're here today to discuss the documentary Beba, directed by Rebeca Huntt, the conversation moderated by Carlos Aguilar. Thank you again also to our ASL interpreter, Andrea Lust, and CART captioner, Pam. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize that the Gabrielino Tongva are the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources of the unceded territory of Los Angeles. So with that, please begin. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Carlos Aguilar. I'm a film critic, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Rebeca Huntt to talk about Beba, a documentary that I absolutely love and that I'm excited to learn more about. Thank you for joining us, Rebeca.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, IDA, for having me. This is really exciting.
Amazing. So I know that you started the documentary when you were 24 years old, and it was sort of like an 8-year process. How did that process begin? Was it always going to be a film? Were there sort of like loose musings that you had, sort of like around and then turn into a film? Walk us a little bit through that process of the beginning of Beba.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we always knew that Beba was going to be a film. I always knew that Beba was going to be a film. My producer, Sophia Geld, and I had a conversation early on in 2014 about making a film and making this film. And so I immediately started looking at my journal entries as the first point or the first frame of reference, and started filming right away. And also, looking at older footage that I had with my friends in college and my family and archival and like photo booth videos. So it was always going to be a film. That was always the case.
What were you in your life at that time when you first started making the film? Had you just graduated college? Were you still debating, what your first project was going to be?
I was a recent college graduate, and I was coming into like a high tension New York City. I think New York was very high tension at the time because of socio-political things, and also, having come from this sort of utopian but also very complex place, Bard College, my alma mater, back into my home, which was a very different environment, propelled me to really want to connect and do something that I felt would help me connect with people in a deeper way, and that was essentially what became Beba, what became this film.
What would you say is the most sort of complicated or complex thing about being the lens and the subject in the documentary, sort of like encompassing the storyteller and also, the main subject of who the story is about?
I would say that it would be, in terms of being the director and the subject at the same time, it is being honest with myself about the things that were important to the places that were important to go, and having those two voices in my head at all times of like, oh, I don't really want to go here. It's like, but this is what it is. This is what we need to do. And I think I had a great team, and particularly a great editor who was there to sort of help me stay that course when there were moments where I was like, ooh, too cringe. It's like, nope, we've got to stay on course.
That feels particularly difficult, right? When you're sort of these two positions at once and having to make those tough decisions of, perhaps revealing too much or making yourself vulnerable as a person, not only as an artist. Were you hesitant at times about how much you were showing?
Absolutely. I still feel like, there's always hesitations. However, there was a larger purpose and there was a goal to be met. And I felt like that was bigger than me. And it was more important for me to stay that course than anything. But it's interesting. It's interesting to have both lenses. I think it makes me it's made me a better filmmaker to have been both the director and the writer and the subject, and have and also a producer on the film. It's really made me overall like a better filmmaker. We have so many different sides to us as human beings. Like, we're so complex. So it's interesting to have to sort of navigate a couple of those sides, specifically director and subject at the same time in terms of the content of the film.
Totally. You shot some of the elements are on 16 millimeter. Was it the entirety of the film shot on 16 millimeter? And why did you decide that this was sort of the medium that worked best for the film?
Not the entire film is shot on 16 millimeter. There are some parts that are archival digital, some parts that are shot on 35. The reason why I decided that it was important to shoot some of the more abstract, especially some of the more abstract scenes on 16 millimeter is because 16 millimeter is a very limited and pulsating work. So it's a very limited and pulsating lens illustration. The way it portrays is limited and pulsating. And I feel like intimacy is also extremely limited and pulsating. Like, when I think about intimacy, I think about like looking at this part on my arm and noticing that I have this, a birthmark right here. Or, when I'm in bed with a partner and like looking closely at a certain part of them, or even like being home and being able to see a certain part of my wall, like where I look often and can remember those details. It's like intimacy within itself, it can be described as limited and pulsating, and so can 16 millimeter. But I think it's also what we can do with color there is really, really amazing. The opportunity for color and post with 16 millimeter, which is something that really excited me and also made me feel like would add to sort of this universe that we were creating. So
can you talk about creating, or coming up with the more abstract sequences that are so very lyrical? And I really love that it wasn't the type of documentary that is explicitly illustrating what's being said, but sort of evoking certain imagery that's very powerful. How did you sort of devise these sequences?
I mean, is there a specific sequence? I feel like there's, every single one of the sequences was like a world in its own. Is there a specific sequence that you have a question about?
Yeah, I think the ones in which we see you in nature are the ones that I feel like come to mind more closely. Is that something that you were particularly interested in sort of like that relationship?
Well, yeah, I think, also I love nature. I live in a rural mountain area in Mexico because of how much I love nature, even though I'm born and raised in New York. I grew up in the Andes, going to the Andes every summer to visit my grandmother. And also just, our relationship to nature as human beings. I mean, we are nature, but our relationship to nature fascinates me, and it's absolutely universal. And I think it's what is more authentic than nature? Nature
Right.
just is. And so, yeah, I mean, that's as specific as I can get, because I feel like the question was a great one, but it's very general. So I have to give a general answer. There's like specific things that were put into like specific scenes, or like why this and that. But I don't know, it would take a long time to go through all of them. But I think that the general answer to that is what I said.
Do you have a particular sequence that was, particularly difficult or unique or special for you in terms of this, the more lyrical elements of it?
I mean, I think they're all really special because they were all really personal, and they all have a lot of, there's levels of symbolism in each one. There's nothing that you see and hear that isn't 100% intentional. Además, there's things that you hear that you probably don't even know you hear, because I spent 3 months on the sound at Splendor Omnia Studios in Mexico, working diligently on sort of creating the sound design or working with the sound designers and the sound mixers to ensure that it was this sort of holistic experience. So I feel, every single moment is intentional in the film. And yeah.
Amazing. I find it fascinating too, very compelling the way that you talk about identity in the film as it relates to Latinidad and sort of like, the way that you sort of grew up understanding that. I wonder if you could expand on that and sort of like, understanding the way your parents come from and, being first generation and also being a Black woman in this country.
Yeah, I think that, it's just, in terms of having multiple identities, I feel like that's something that is a big part of my shared experience on this, on this plane. And it was really important for me to just give an honest perspective of that experience. And I appreciate the kind of art that trusts in its audience and that gives space for authentic connection instead of sort of, trying to force any kind of message. I don't like being forced any kind of messages, but it was really just like, I hear that the personal is political, and I would argue that the personal is universal. And I was hoping to be able to connect on that level,
Right.
more so than anything else.
Right. I guess my question was because we still see so rarely, that intersection between Latinidad and Blackness because of, the biases and colonialism and the sort of notions that we have about what being Latino in this country is that are so limited.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess in that sense, I could talk about one of the scenes. There's a scene that, and this is a lot less obvious, but this is, this is the answer that I can give to that is, in Latino America, the Afro-Latin resistance was very localized. And so there's palenques all over the place. There's and palenques are sort of free towns that, that enslaved persons, founded and then created these really incredibly strong communities around. And they're all over from Mexico from Mexico to Argentina. There are palenques, and then you can find they're all over the place. And so that scene where I'm sort of in the water and putting mud on, and I'm putting mud on my face, and I'm talking about, I think it's the Lost as I Am poem, was reminiscent to me of like my ancestors who were in a palenque. Like, what were they doing on Tuesday at 3 p.m.? And so, just giving it an insight on what that was. And I feel like that's very specific to being Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Latina. And that was actually shot in Veracruz, Mexico, which is where the largest slave port exists in Mexico, in Central America, and also where there is, one of the most incredible palenques, or not the most incredible, I mean, there's no such thing as one of the most incredible palenques, but one of the most famous palenques, I would say. So yeah.
I think. How did you go about, the interviews with your parents? I mean, of course, the interview with your mother that we see in the film is sort of uncomfortable and powerful, and those conversations of including them, were they difficult from the beginning? Sort of the ask of, can you be in this film?
Well, the conversation with my mom isn't really a conversation, which I think was what was interesting about that. And it sort of depicts exactly where our relationship was at the time.
Mm.
I guess that's a moment where it was like, okay, well, this is what Rebecca, this is what it is. This is what you have. This is what we show. I had tried to film a couple or a few times with her, and that was the best outcome. So like some of the shots you saw were the best outcome of trying to interview my mother. I think that, yeah, it was definitely challenging, or it was definitely something to navigate. Interviewing my parents, interviewing my family members, following my sister around. It was absolutely something to navigate. But it was never a secret. It was like, I'm working on this film about me, and I want you guys, I want to interview you guys. I want to talk about, there's certain things I want to talk to you guys about. Okay, but family is challenging,
Mm. Did you feel that you learned anything that was unknown to you about them, even as sort of challenging as it was to sort of discuss certain things with them?
Definitely. And it was challenging. There was a lot of beauty that came out of it as well. It's like, and there were incredible moments, even with my mother. And, you see all that challenging footage, but there was really beautiful moments of just learning more about our relationship, even though it was really complex at the time. I mean, or continues to be, but whatever. There was definitely some really beautiful things that I learned about them yeah.
I mean, I also think that it's very powerful how you, even in in that sort of difficult scene with your mother, you also go into her past and where she came from, and sort of like trying to investigate the reason certain people or parents have the reasoning that they have for the things that they do. Was that the process of sort of like building that backstory for your own parents interesting to you in terms of what was available, what you could learn, what was sort of unknown to you about them?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite processes, honestly, was being able to go back into their sort of the worlds they grew up in for a second. Like each one of their portions of the film goes back into the worlds that they grew up in for a second. And, like we hired an archival producer to help with that, and just kind of looking through all the stuff, and also the writing process for, which happened before that, the writing process for what I actually wanted to say about them was really rich. And there was this one part of the writing for my mom, which I think is some of my editor, and my favorite writing, that I had to take out because it was too long.
Mm.
And it's just, it's just something that it's not in the film and nobody will ever hear or see, but it was such an incredible process for me to write that, and for that to come up and come out of me years ago, when developing the portion of my mother.
Right. Can you talk about the editing process? I mean, you had this wealth of material. How do you bring it all together into something that feels cohesive to the extent that it constructs the experience that you want to put forward?
For the editing process, sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah. How do you go about
Yeah.
constructing this cohesive narrative, cohesive as the experience that you want to share with the audience?
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there was also like the writing does follow a 3-act structure. I know it's like very, very experimental, but there is like an inciting incident, there is a sort of climax, there is a resolution. Like there's no resolution, but in the writing, like in my head, the way that the writing is structured as a 3-act structure. And then there was certain scenes in my head that I'd been watching for years. And overall, I knew how I wanted the movie to look and feel. Like I knew the kind of sort of the notes that I wanted it to hit, and the fabric, with specific scenes completely mapped out in my head, specifically the 16mm scenes. And then having Isabel, who's such a talented editor and who is just like, you know, had the emotional intelligence and the taste to really go there with me. She kind of just took things, she took my vision to the next level, and we were able to work really well together. We worked together full time for I think 18 months over Zoom, 5 days a week from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 every single day, except, you know, sometimes saves maybe like a week at a time or something, a few weeks where it was like, all right, you take this, like, or I can't look at this anymore. But you know, she was on Premiere and I was on, you know, and sharing her screen with me on Zoom, and we just made a great team. There was a lot of trust there, and we were able to do it.
When you're, you know, rewatching the same footage over and over, and it's, you know, very personal footage, is there ever a moment where you can detach from the emotional significance of the scenes and see them as, you know, the building blocks of a story, or is it impossible to sort of
Yeah,
like detach?
definitely. I detached during the post-production process. I'm detached.
Tell us about, you know, the release of the film, and or sort of the once it was, you know, finished and it was going to festivals. Did your parents see it before? Did they see a cut? Did they not?
Yeah, well, I actually, so the film got into Toronto, and I found out that it had its world premiere at Toronto International Film Festival. And I found out that it had gotten into Toronto the last day of the sound mix. Tom Powers called me, and it was like, I mean, one of the greatest moments in my entire life, top 3 moments of my life, because I knew that it was going to be a game changer for my entire team and for me, as a first-time feature filmmaker. And so I remember after, like, I cried and, you know, like, you know, did the whole thing. I was like, oh shit, I have to show it to my parents now. Because I hadn't thought about it. Like, I wasn't asking for permission. This was my endeavor. I didn't feel a need or desire to share my process with anybody because I didn't want any opinions. So from my family. So it was something that I was owning, that I did, and I wasn't sorry about. So when I, you know, but when I finished, I was like, oh shit, I have to face the reality of showing it to them. And what better way to sort of break the ice than be like, all right, like I made this thing, but it got into Toronto International Film Festival. So it's like my dream just came true, essentially. And it was it was like, because my parents inevitably were going to be incredibly proud of me. And they were. And that was the hardest part, I think, of the release, was showing it to my parents.
Were they at the premiere? Did they attend the premiere?
Yeah, many. Oh my God, they loved it. They went to Toronto. They went to Tribeca. They brought all their friends. Yeah.
And was there ever a moment in which, you know, not that they confronted, but that they were sort of like uncomfortable with some of the things that were said, or was that something that
Absolutely. They were
yeah.
absolutely uncomfortable with certain things.
I mean, I feel like that's, I don't know how, I think that I find the film incredibly brave because of that, but also because of the way that you know, you know, describe yourself and sort of question yourself. And you know, like you talked a little bit about that at the beginning, when, you know, having to, you know, move forward with those uncomfortable things. But once the film was finished, did you know, did you feel like you were in a different place from when you started? What was that sort of
Definitely.
transformation for
I
you?
mean, the film is my 20s. The film is my entire 20s. I'm 32 now. Like, your 20s is a moment of exponential growth every single year. Like, 24 is nothing like 25, and 25 is nothing like 26, and 26 is nothing. It's all quantum leaps and existential setbacks. And that's why it's such a fascinating moment in life, because you're also learning how to participate in the world
Mm.
as an adult. It's an existential coming of age.
So when you saw the finished film, what did you think about the Rebecca that started it, the 24-year-old Rebecca? You know, seeing it from the 32 that finished the film.
I mean, I'm able to have like acceptance and compassion, but it's also like cringe. Yeah, I mean, the film ends, and the film itself ends when I'm in my mid-20s. So, you know.
Right, it's a different time, a different period.
Definitely.
And in that sense, did you feel that you learned something unique about yourself in the making? Was there a touchstone or something that sort of like clicked for you in the making of it about who you are, or the kind of artist that you want to become, that you want to be?
Yeah, I think I had many of those moments. I think I had many of those moments of learning more about myself. But I think one of the main things for me that I feel this film gave me that I would have definitely taken me like a decade or two more is a level of self-acceptance. Like if I hadn't made this film, there's like a profound level of self-acceptance that I wouldn't have reached until 20 years from now, or 10 maybe. I hypothesize. But it's deep, and it's like a tiny thing. It's not like I'm walking around like, "Ooh, I accept it." It's, you know, every day is a new day. It comes with new things to navigate. But if we're talking like on a quantum level, for sure.
I don't think I asked you before, but I always this is something that I always I'm interested in when I talk to like first generation children of immigrants that pursue artistic careers, and the sort of the understanding of the family of that pursuit, and for people that perhaps didn't have a chance to pursue those things, or for whom they weren't a realistic sort of pathway in life. Were your parents sort of like always understanding of these of your artistic sort of sensibilities?
No, I still think they don't quite know what I do. Like I know they know now that I make movies, but they don't really understand to the extent that I would think some of my other peers' parents are in tune with, which I kind of love. But it's also makes things more complicated in terms of like knowing how to support me in that way. But I think that, yeah, I remember having this one conversation though with my father where I called him, and it was like I was like maybe 24, 23, and maybe 24. And I said, and I had this job. I had this job like in kind of, it was like the only office job I've ever had, and I was really, really struggling like to be there. And I said, Dad, like, do you think it's selfish of me to want to be an artist? Do you think it's selfish of me that I want to be a filmmaker? Because it's the only thing I want. And I want it more than anything. And he was like, you have to do what makes you happy. I don't understand it, but you do what makes you happy. That's the most important. And to be honest, after that, that changed everything. Like that conversation with my father changed everything for me internally in a way that I can't really explain and don't really want to go into more.
Totally. Guess lastly, now that Beba sort of like out there in the world, what are other things that you're interested in making films about or pursuing that are perhaps less deeply connected to you on a on a personal level, or sort of like portraits of people, what really compels you to make films?
Yeah, I right now I'm working on my first narrative script. I will always make both documentary and fiction if health and the universe allows, because I am deeply attached to both as art forms. Like, and they're both equally as important to my artistry and to my influence and being. It's only sort of now that, you know, Beba has entered into a different sphere that I'm realizing there's any kind of separation, and I don't really understand it and don't want to kind of. But I'm interested in the human experience. I'm interested in telling stories that make us all feel less alone, and that are authentic depictions of diverse perspectives. Because I think it'll make us a little bit more free, and that's what I'm interested in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing so much and for being here with us today. And for Beba, which I'll continue to say that it is perhaps one of my favorite documentaries of the year. Really a brave work that I want to continue rewatching and continue rediscovering.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Carlos. Thank you for your very thoughtful questions, and thank the IDA for having me. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope you love the film.
Thank you.
To watch it. Thank you.